The bridge of the ISS Damnation was bathed in the cold glow of laser plasma displays, tactical data scrolling like battle scars across the air. The ship's reinforced hull groaned as if whispering defiance against the crushing grip of space. Red alert strobes pulsed like a dying heartbeat, flashing across the faces of the men who had defied extinction one battle too many. Admiral Ryland Voss stood rigid at the command deck, his fingers clenched behind his back, his jaw set like iron. His gaze fixed on the incoming Dominion fleet, its monstrous dreadnoughts advancing through the debris field of what had once been a human colony. Their sleek, predatory hulls gleamed under distant starlight, vultures circling the last corpse of Earth's legacy. "Admiral, they're hailing us again," came the strained voice of Commander Orrin Dax, his former life as a diplomat evident in the tight control of his tone. He was seated at the communications console, shoulders drawn back like a man still trying to believe in diplomacy when there was nothing left to bargain. Voss didn't turn. His expression remained unreadable, carved from years of war. "Let them talk." The transmission flickered to life on the heads-up display, revealing Lord High Regent Azrak Vel of the Zavarian Dominion, draped in his ceremonial obsidian armor. His elongated reptilian face was a mask of cold amusement, slit-pupil eyes narrowing with something between disdain and satisfaction. "Admiral Voss, your species should have accepted oblivion with grace. You have lost. The war is over." A deep, almost amused chuckle rumbled from Voss's chest, dry as old earth beneath an unyielding sun. He took a slow step forward, his presence commanding without effort. "Funny. That's what the last 3 Dominion admirals told me, just before I turned their ships into drifting coffins." A flicker of irritation twitched across Vel's ridged brow, but he quickly masked it. Predators disliked being reminded they could bleed. "This is not a negotiation. There will be no surrender terms. Your fleet is surrounded." Commander Dax exhaled sharply. Captain Eliar Morn, standing near the weapons console, crossed his arms, his grip tightening on his sleeve like he was physically holding back the need to fire the first shot. Voss tilted his head slightly as if considering a move on a chessboard that only he could see. "Surrounded," he murmured almost to himself. "Such an interesting word." A silent pause stretched, only broken by the rhythmic beeping of enemy targeting locks cycling through their attack formations. Then Voss spoke again, calm, absolute, like the sound of a tomb sealing shut. "Fire at nothing, hold formation, and prepare for silence." A ripple of confusion flickered across the bridge crew, but no one questioned him. They had learned long ago. When Voss made a move, it was never the move the enemy expected. The Dominion fleet advanced, unaware that it had already lost. Zavarian warships cut through the drifting graveyard of broken human vessels, their sensor sweeps searching for energy signatures, for any desperate attempt at escape. But the last fleet of humanity was motionless, drifting, silent, unseen. Deep within the heart of the battlefield, hidden behind the shattered wreckage of a forgotten space station, a cluster of human stealth ships lay dormant. Admiral Voss's voice came through the encrypted channels, measured, unshaken. "On my mark. Switch to silent running. I want nothing but whispers in the dark." Captain Morn gave a sharp nod, fingers gliding over his console. "Engaging stealth drives." Across the fleet, warships dimmed their reactors, power signatures vanishing into the abyss. Their hulls blended with the wreckage, appearing as nothing more than ghosts of the dead, remnants of a war already lost. The Dominion fleet pushed forward, certain of their victory. They never saw the trap tightening around them. The memory clawed into Voss's mind unbidden, as vivid as if he were still there. The sky was burning. He was a child then, standing in the ruins of New Geneva, watching as the Galactic Council's warships abandoned Earth to the Dominion's orbital bombardment. The screams of dying cities were drowned beneath the deafening thunder of collapsing buildings. Ash reigned like a silent funeral. His father, Fleet Marshal Arik Voss, stood before him, wounded, weary, but unbroken. "Listen to me, Rylan." His father's grip on his shoulder was iron hard, unwavering despite the blood staining his uniform. "A war isn't won by those who fight hardest, it's won by those who know when to disappear." And then the final evacuation shuttles lifted off, leaving the broken world behind, leaving Earth's vengeance to the last survivors. The Dominion expected a battle. They were prepared for one. What they were not prepared for was nothing. On the bridge of the damnation, Captain Morn's voice was a low growl, eyes fixed on the Dominion formations, hungry for the order to fire. "Admiral, they're closing into optimal range. We can—" "No." Morn stiffened. "Sir?" Voss's eyes gleamed, sharp as a blade edge catching the light. "Let them step further in. Let them feel safe. Let them believe we are beaten." The Dominion fleet, unaware of the growing noose around its neck, pressed deeper into the battlefield, pushing toward the human ships like a predator moving in for the kill. Voss leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "Give them silence, gentlemen. Let them make the first mistake." And so, the last fleet of humanity waited in the dark, for the perfect moment when the hunters would realize, too late, that they were the prey. The Dominion fleet advanced, oblivious to the silent noose tightening around its throat. Their warships sliced through the wreckage, casting eerie shadows across the debris field, their searchlights carving through the dark like the eyes of a predator scanning for prey. The illusion of total control, of victory, fed their arrogance, and that was exactly what Voss wanted. Inside the ISS damnation, the air carried the weight of impending violence, thick and electric. The bridge remained eerily still, every man locked in quiet, rigid discipline. Heads-up displays flickered in the dim glow, scanning the enemy's every move. Tension didn't come in raised voices or frantic movements. It coiled in the absence of them. Captain Eliar Morn leaned against the weapons console, his fingers drumming against the surface like the idle ticks of a waiting executioner's clock. His scarred knuckles flexed each time a Dominion ship maneuvered closer. "They're in striking range," he muttered, voice low but edged with a razor's impatience. "We could carve through their front line before they even know what hit them." "Too soon," Voss said, his gaze locked on the displays. "Let them feel comfortable. Let them sink deeper into their own certainty." Commander Oren Dax, ever the diplomat in a soldier's uniform, folded his arms and exhaled. "And what happens when their scanners start asking questions? They're not complete idiots, Rylan." Voss's lips barely curved. "No. Watch them long enough, and you start to wonder." He motioned toward the tactical display, where the Dominion fleet's formation had become sloppier, their destroyers drifting just far enough apart to create gaps. Gaps a desperate fleet might be expected to exploit. Dax frowned, realization dawning. "They think we're planning a breakout." "They do." Voss's voice held no trace of amusement. "And when they commit to stopping it, we won't be breaking out. We'll be closing in." A sharp beep cut through the quiet. One of the smaller Dominion cruisers had altered course, its trajectory veering closer to the wreckage where their fleet lay hidden. A scout, sniffing for signs of deception. Morn's fingers hovered over the targeting systems. "Let me take it out before it gets curious." Voss's hand barely lifted from his side, a subtle gesture of restraint. "Not yet. Let them think they've found something." The bridge was deathly silent as they watched the Dominion ship drift closer, its scanners sweeping across the lifeless wreckage. Seconds stretched, slow and suffocating. Then, the cruiser's engines flared as it changed direction, reporting its findings back to the fleet. Dax's breath came tight. "What the hell was that?" Voss turned from the display and finally faced his officers, his expression unreadable. That was the first crack in their armor. That scout just told them exactly what they wanted to hear, that we're weak, scattered, and ready to be crushed. They don't realize we've been feeding them the narrative since the moment they arrived. Morn let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. This is a hell of a gamble, Admiral. Voss's gaze flicked back to the Dominion's dreadnoughts, now shifting into a predatory stance, their battle lines adjusting to intercept a non-existent escape attempt. No gamble, just inevitability. A new alert flashed on the heads-up display. Another Dominion transmission was incoming. They're trying to talk again, Dax muttered, fingers tensing against his arms. Voss let out a slow, measured breath before nodding. Let's see what the Regent thinks he knows. The image of Lord High Regent Azrak Vel reappeared, his golden cloak gleaming under artificial light. He sat like a man assured of his own triumph, fingers steepled as if this were a political formality rather than the final hours of a war. Admiral Voss, I commend you for lasting this long. Humanity's resilience, I should say, what remains of it, is commendable. But this is the end. Dax stiffened at the carefully chosen words, but Voss remained unaffected. His voice was almost conversational, distant, as if this exchange were happening over coffee rather than the ruin of his species. Funny, Voss mused, tilting his head slightly. That's the second time today someone's told me that. Azrak Vel's nostrils flared slightly, but he maintained his regal calm. Your fleet is exhausted. Your supplies are dwindling. There is no world left for you to return to. No allies waiting in the shadows. I am offering you the only path left, a swift, honorable death. Morn let out a slow exhale, shaking his head. He actually thinks he's being generous. Voss only smiled. I appreciate the offer, Regent, really, but tell me something. Does your offer extend to your own men? Azrak Vel's reptilian eyes narrowed. Explain yourself. Voss stepped forward, voice quiet, certain. I mean, do they know? About the cracks in your fleet? About the reports you keep suppressing? About the ships that have already gone silent? A beat of silence. The Dominion ruler's jaw tensed slightly, a tell so small that only someone searching for it would have caught it. Morn let out a breath of amusement. Oh, that hit a nerve! Voss's voice dropped even lower, almost intimate in its quiet menace. You've already lost your war, Regent. You just don't know it yet. The transmission cut off. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Dax broke the silence. That was a bold bluff. It wasn't a bluff, Voss said, eyes still locked on the heads-up display. It was a warning. A new alert blinked to life on the screen, an encrypted transmission from deep space. Morn's brows furrowed. That's not one of ours. Dax's stomach clenched. Then who the hell is answering back? Voss's fingers tapped against the console, pulse slow and steady. His expression didn't change, but something dark and unreadable flickered beneath the surface. That's what we're about to find out. The encrypted transmission pulsed like a heartbeat on the heads-up display, its origin buried deep in the void. It shouldn't exist. It wasn't one of theirs. But it was answering back. Admiral Rylan Voss watched the data stream scroll in jagged bursts, a language so old even their ship's translation banks struggled to make sense of it. The numbers flickered, shifting through half-deciphered codes, coordinates maybe, or something worse. Captain Eliar Morn's voice was low, measured, but edged with something taut as a drawn wire ready to snap. That signal isn't just bouncing, it's locking onto us. Commander Oren Dax exhaled sharply. That's not possible. We're dark, no active emissions, no transmission trail. The bridge crew sat frozen in the flickering lights, the weight of the moment pressing into their bones. Outside, the Dominion fleet prowled deeper into the wreckage, unknowingly threading itself into a noose. The humans had set the bait, but now something else was stirring in the shadows. Voss straightened, his voice a blade slicing through the unease. "Bring it up. Let's see who's knocking on our grave." The signal decrypted in bursts, fragments of a voice cutting through static, harsh, distant, layered with something that shouldn't be there. "Repeat. Received. Active. Forgotten." Dax stiffened. "That's human." Morn's hands curled into fists. "Number." "That's something pretending to be." The transmission was incomplete, broken, but it had weight, a gravity that pulled Voss's thoughts back into the past. He had spent years memorizing the voices of the dead. The commanders who had sent their last warnings before the fall. The desperate pleas that had flickered through deep space channels before Earth went silent. This was not one of them. Voss kept his expression unreadable. "Run a trace." "How old is that transmission?" The crew worked in tense silence. A moment later, a whisper of disbelief from Lieutenant Varen Hale, manning the analytical systems. "Sir, it's ancient. More than a century old." A century. That meant one thing. It had been sent before Earth was lost. Morn spoke first, his tone flat but sharp-edged. "This is a trap. Has to be." Dax's gaze flicked to Voss, searching for an answer. "But who's setting it?" Voss didn't answer immediately. He stared at the numbers on the display, fingers curling slightly as a realization settled in. Whoever had sent this signal had not expected a reply. This wasn't a trap. It was a breadcrumb. And someone, or something, was waiting at the end of the trail. He turned, meeting the eyes of his officers one by one. The flickering lights cast deep shadows across their faces, reflecting the weight of choices they weren't ready to make. "Mark the coordinates," he ordered. "But we don't break formation. Not yet." Morn exhaled, tension bleeding from his stance in sharp increments. "Good. We've got enough ghosts in this battle already." Dax, however, wasn't convinced. "Sir, what if that's—" He didn't get the chance to finish. A warning alarm blared, cutting through the thick silence. A Dominion scout frigate had changed course, accelerating toward the wreckage where their fleet lay hidden. Unlike the others, this one wasn't following a pattern. It was searching, actively probing the debris. It had caught a whisper of something, and it wasn't leaving until it found out what. Morn's fists clenched. "They're testing the field." Voss nodded, stepping forward. "Time to make them believe what they want to believe." His voice was cold, distant. The voice of a man already 10 steps ahead of his enemy. The scout frigate crept closer, its scanners cutting through layers of debris, sweeping over drifting hulls and ruined structures. It was searching for an energy signature, something, anything, to confirm their prey was still breathing. The Dominion officers aboard that ship had no idea they were already dead men. Voss turned to his tactical officer. "Patch into their scanner relay. Feed them what they want to see." Lieutenant Hale nodded, fingers flying over the console. A moment later, Dominion scanners registered the phantom echoes of a struggling human warship. Damaged, leaking radiation, its life support flickering. A survivor, too weak to flee, too broken to hide. The frigate adjusted course instantly, drawn to the bait. Morn exhaled through his nose. "They always take the easy kill," Dax muttered. "They don't realize they are the kill." The frigate moved in, closing distance, confident in its overwhelming power. It activated its weapons, prepared to destroy a dying enemy without a second thought. Voss waited. The Dominion ship fired. The moment it did, the wreckage came alive. From the husks of ruined vessels, human warships flickered into motion. Hidden beneath cold layers of inactive plating, they burst to life like wolves, shaking off the disguise of the dead. The frigate's sensors lit up in warning too late. 3 human interceptor ships struck first, accelerating from the wreckage with brutal speed. Their magnetic harpoons fired, embedding into the Dominion ship's hull, sending shudders through its frame. The enemy ship tried to retreat, but its fate had already been written. A controlled EMP surge flooded through the harpoons, burning out their navigation systems, leaving them blind, stranded in the dark. Inside the Dominion warship, panic had already set in. The officers aboard shouted over each other, scrambling to recover their failing systems, desperate to understand how their simple execution had turned into a death sentence. Voss gave the final order. Now! The interceptors released their payloads, compact neutron charges that latched onto the Dominion frigate's hull and detonated in synchronized bursts. The explosion was quick, controlled. There was no fireball, no grand spectacle of destruction, just a ship once hunting, now reduced to broken silence. Morn smirked. One down. They'll notice that. They will, Voss agreed. And they'll react exactly how we need them to. Dax turned to him. They'll think we're desperate, that we're cornered and lashing out. Exactly. Voss's gaze never left the display. They don't realize we're the ones hurting them. The Dominion fleet began shifting, adjusting formations in response to their missing ship. Voss could see it already, how they would press in harder, tightening their hold. They thought they had their prey. They didn't realize they had just stepped deeper into the trap. Morn folded his arms, watching the display. So when do we spring it? Voss let out a slow breath, his fingers tapping against the command console. He glanced at the encrypted signal still lingering on the display, the unanswered mystery, the silent voice from the past. He didn't like unanswered questions. But for now, the war came first. We let them think they're winning, he said, voice cold as the void. And when they realize the truth, it'll be too late to run. The Dominion moved exactly as predicted. The absence of their lost frigate sent ripples through their formation, causing subtle shifts, recalculations. They didn't see the kill box closing around them. Not yet. Admiral Ryland Voss stood at the center of the ISS Damnation's bridge, watching the Dominion fleet tighten their grip. They were pressing in, closing every gap they assumed humanity might try to escape through. Perfect. But his focus was split. The signal still pulsed on the heads-up display, a silent reminder that something ancient, waiting, unresolved had reawakened. It was still broadcasting, faint but insistent. A ghost from before the fall. Commander Orrin Dax leaned closer to his station, running another scan through the encryption layers. It's not a transmission on repeat, he murmured. It's active. Something is sending this now. Deliberately. Captain Eliar Morn gritted his teeth, arms folded as his sharp eyes flicked between tactical data and the ghost signal. Either someone's playing a game with us, or something out there isn't as dead as we thought. Voss finally turned from the Dominion's predictable blunders to the true unknown. Where does it lead? Lieutenant Varen Hale's fingers flew over the interface, decrypting in real time. Numbers unraveled, shapes forming into coordinates, a location on the edge of a dead sector. Dax frowned. That's nowhere. That system was abandoned before Earth fell. No habitable planets, no known stations, nothing but a frozen graveyard. Morn's jaw tightened. Except someone, or something, is calling us there. For the first time since the battle began, uncertainty breathed through the bridge. Voss absorbed the data in silence. His officers were right. No logic suggested an ally waiting in the dark. No sensible commander would divert from a war this critical to chase a whisper. But wars weren't just won on strategy. Sometimes the right unanswered question could be more dangerous than 1,000 warships. Voss made his decision. Keep the Dominion locked in our trap. Adjust the battle sequence. Delay the strike. Give them time to dig themselves deeper. Meanwhile, we send a scout ship. Dax tensed. Sir, if this is some kind of bait... That's why we don't go in blind, Voss said. We don't send one of ours. We send an echo. Morn's eyes narrowed, understanding creeping in. You want to send a decoy. Voss turned to Hale. Deploy a remote relay. Send back a ghost signal on a human distress frequency, just weak enough to seem like a ship barely clinging to life. If there's anything waiting out there, we let it come to us first. Dax exhaled, rubbing his jaw. And if something answers? Then we finally find out what's been waiting 100 years to talk. The decoy relay drifted into the dead sector, a manufactured distress call whispering through the void. It pulsed in short, broken bursts, not a scream, but a breath, an exhale from something lost. The bridge remained silent, every officer locked onto their displays, watching, waiting. Minutes passed. Then something shifted. The signal changed. It was subtle, not an automatic response, not an echo, but an alteration in rhythm, a pulse that wasn't coming from their relay. Morn stiffened. That's not a reflection. That's an answer. Dax muttered something under his breath. No way in hell. The new signal wasn't human, but it wasn't Dominion either. It was something else. Voss's eyes narrowed as the patterns unfolded on the display. The frequency shifted, morphing through something too precise, too aware, too controlled to be random noise. And then, a word. Not a full sentence, not a phrase, just one word, buried in the transmission, distorted, stretched as if it had been dragged across time itself. Damnation! The bridge fell into a dead silence. Dax's breath came slow, controlled, but his hands were white-knuckled against the edge of his console. Tell me I didn't just hear our ship's name come back on that frequency. Hale swallowed. It's not a coincidence. Whatever's out there knows us. Morn's fingers tapped against his thigh in measured beats. That system was abandoned before the war. There was never a battle there. So why the hell would something be waiting for us? Voss didn't answer immediately. He was staring at the signal, at the echo that wasn't an echo. A message, spoken across the dark. The Dominion could wait a little longer. Even as the battle around them continued, the Dominion still hadn't realized what was happening. They believed they were the hunters, circling for the final strike. What they didn't see, what they couldn't see, was how the battlefield was shifting, how the wreckage and debris had subtly rearranged itself, turning their own formations against them. Morn's voice carried a sharp edge. They're getting antsy. They know something's wrong, but they don't know what. Voss nodded slowly. That's the best kind of enemy, one that knows it's bleeding but can't find the wound. Dax was still locked onto the mystery signal, his mind spinning in quiet, careful circles. Sir, if we move toward that sector, we're going blind. We have no idea what's waiting. Voss's response was simple. Neither do they. Morn smirked. And that's the real weapon, isn't it? Fear of the unknown. Voss turned back to the Dominion fleet, watching them maneuver themselves deeper into their own downfall. The only war worth winning is the one where your enemy breaks themselves before the final blow. Dax exhaled, rubbing a hand across his face. You think that signal is bait? I think it doesn't matter what I think. Voss's voice was even, distant. Something out there knows our name, and the only way to control the unknown, his fingers tapped once against the edge of the command console, is to meet it first. The decision was made. The damnation began its silent course toward the dead sector, slipping away from the battle unnoticed. The Dominion still thought they were winning. They had no idea that humanity was already walking toward something older, something waiting, and if they weren't careful, something waiting to be awakened. The damnation cut through the black, veering away from the noose the Dominion fleet had unwittingly looped around itself. The battleships remained locked in their tightening formation, unaware that their prey had already stepped beyond the battlefield, reaching for something they weren't even looking for. On the heads-up display, the ghost signal pulsed again, a heartbeat from a past that shouldn't be speaking. The closer they got to the dead sector, the stronger it became. No longer a whisper, but something deliberate, waiting. Commander Orendax's voice broke the silence, low and weighted. "We're running out of time. If the Dominion notices we've changed course, they won't," Voss said without looking up. His focus was locked on the tactical layout, watching the enemy's own overconfidence blind them to reality. Captain Eliar Morn exhaled sharply, arms folded. "They're starting to shift formations. They're expecting us to try and slip through their perimeter." "They still think we're retreating," Voss murmured. Morn tilted his head slightly, watching the screen. "And what happens when they realize we're not running?" A cold smirk tugged at the edges of Voss's lips. "Then they'll learn that fear isn't about losing sight of your enemy. It's about realizing you never saw them at all." Deep in the Dominion flagship, Lord High Regent Azrak Vel paced before the Central Command dais, his clawed fingers drumming against his ornate armor. His advisors stood rigidly behind him, watching as the battle reports scrolled across the laser plasma displays. The humans weren't breaking. The Dominion had studied them, dissected their weaknesses, burned their worlds to ash. This should have been their death rattle, and yet something was wrong. His adjutant, a cold-eyed officer named Zeros, cleared his throat. "Excellency, we've confirmed the destruction of the scout frigate. However," a hesitation. "Unusual." Azrak Vel narrowed his eyes. "Speak." Zyros's tongue flicked over sharp teeth before he continued. "The humans should have responded differently. Desperation breeds reckless charges, suicide attacks. Instead, they are deliberate, almost calculated." Azrak Vel's claws twitched. He had felt it too. A shift, a phantom pressure in the air, the sensation of stepping forward only to realize the ground beneath you is not where you left it. "Where is their flagship?" Zyros hesitated again. Azrak Vel turned his head slowly. "Adjutant." Zyros swallowed. "We don't know." The words hung like an unspoken accusation. The regent's eyes burned. "What do you mean you don't know?" Zeros gestured toward the display, trying to maintain composure. "Our sensors indicate their fleet remains in the wreckage field, but—" He exhaled. "Their flagship's energy signature has vanished." Azrak Vel went still. Not destroyed, not crippled. Vanished. For the first time since the war began, an unease curled in his gut. Back on the damnation, the tension coiled like a drawn bowstring. Lieutenant Varen Hale's voice was urgent but steady. "The Dominion is adjusting their formation. They're realizing something is off." Voss gave a slow nod. "Good." Dax rubbed his temple. "Define good when we have the entire Zavarian fleet breathing down our backs." "They're shifting to correct their approach," Voss said, "which means they're reacting, not leading. They think we're pulling a standard guerrilla maneuver, bait and retreat." Morn exhaled sharply. "They don't know we're leaving the battlefield." Voss's fingers tapped against the edge of the console. "They don't know anything yet. And by the time they do—" The signal pulsed again. Stronger. It was close. Inside the Dominion War Council, the once unshakable certainty had begun to crack. Fleet movements grew erratic. Some admirals, sensing the disturbance, hesitated. Others, more aggressive, pushed forward, eager to crush humanity before something changed. Azrak Vel's advisors whispered among themselves. Doubt was an infection, and it was spreading. A secondary officer, high-ranking but jittery, finally spoke aloud what they were all thinking. "Excellency, what if—" Azrak Vel's claws lashed out with brutal swiftness. The man choked as the regent's talons pressed against his throat, pinning him against the command console. "What if—" The words slid out like steel dragged over stone. The room was silent. The man gasped for breath. He tried to speak, to explain. Azrak Vel let him drop. He didn't need to kill him. The fear had already done its work. He turned his gaze back to the tactical display. His mind churned. Something was wrong. And for the first time in his long, victorious life, he felt the edge of something he had never experienced before. Dread. The damnation emerged into the dead sector, the signal pulsing stronger than ever. The bridge was silent except for the rhythmic beeping of scanners working to unravel the last mystery. Voss's gaze locked onto the display as the anomaly resolved itself. The signal wasn't coming from a ship. It was coming from a structure, a massive station locked in the orbit of a dead star. Morn's voice was quiet, yet taut. "That's not a colony. That's a fortress." Dax inhaled. "It's human. It has to be." Voss stared at the station, at the jagged, silent mass of metal that had slept for a century. "The Dominion never found this place," he murmured. "Then why is it waking up now?" Dax muttered. The signal pulsed again, and this time, it spoke. The words were clear, sharp, direct. "Admiral Ryland Voss." The bridge went utterly still. Morn's breath came slow, measured. "That's not possible." Dax's voice was barely above a whisper. "No one out here should know his name." Voss didn't blink, because deep in his bones, he already knew the answer. This wasn't just a signal. It was a warning, and something inside the fortress had been waiting for him. The fortress loomed ahead, wrapped in the silent grip of a dead star. Its surface was scarred with centuries-old battle wounds, deep fractures that hinted at a war long forgotten. Towering structures stretched skyward like skeletal remains, their edges catching the dim glow of distant starlight. Inside the damnation, no one spoke. The bridge lights cast long shadows over rigid shoulders and tense grips on control panels. The weight of something unnatural filled the air, thick with the unspoken question, who, no, what, was waiting for them? Commander Oren Dax broke the silence, his voice low. "That signal was addressed to you, Admiral." He turned his head slightly, studying Voss. "You want to tell us why?" Captain Eliar Morn exhaled sharply, arms crossed. "There shouldn't be a damn thing left in this system that knows our names, let alone yours." Voss didn't answer immediately. His gaze remained locked on the monolithic station, fingers tapping against the console. "We don't assume anything. We verify." Dax shot him a look. "That's not an answer." The signal pulsed again, stronger. It wasn't just broadcasting anymore. It was waiting for a response. Lieutenant Varen Hale swallowed, his hands steady over the decryption panel. "It's not Dominion tech, and it's not just a simple data burst, it's a command handshake. It's asking us to engage." Morn's lip curled. "Like hell we're letting some ghost code latch onto our systems." Voss finally turned, his voice quiet but firm. "Then we don't let it latch. We step through the door and decide who walks out first." He straightened, eyes flicking to the tactical display. "Prep a boarding team." Dax's brows furrowed. "You're serious?" Voss gave a slight nod. "We're not taking the damnation into that station blind. We send in a small unit, no direct link to our systems, no vulnerabilities. We find out what's inside before we make any move." A tense pause settled over the bridge. Then Morn let out a dry chuckle. "You always did have a taste for walking into places that should have been left alone." Voss's lips quirked slightly. "And yet I keep walking out." Morn turned, already signaling his men. "Then let's see if your luck holds." The boarding shuttle glided toward the fortress, its hull barely brushing against drifting debris. Inside, Voss, Morn, and a small team of battle-hardened officers sat strapped into their harnesses, weapons primed. The air was thick with the scent of cold metal and worn leather, the quiet hum of life support systems a constant whisper of tension. Morn adjusted his sidearm, his eyes flicking to Voss. "You've been quiet." Voss's gaze remained fixed ahead. "Thinking." Morn smirked. "That's when people start dying." Voss didn't respond, but the barest trace of amusement touched his expression. The shuttle locked onto the docking array, its landing gear scraping against the ancient metal. The airlock cycled open with a deep, echoing groan, the sound of something that hadn't been disturbed in a lifetime. Beyond the hatch, darkness stretched deep into the station's corridors. The absence of movement felt unnatural. No emergency lights flickered, no signs of a failing power system gasping for life. It was as if the entire structure had been frozen in time. Morn's jaw tightened. No decay, no corrosion. This place should be in ruins. Voss stepped forward, his voice even. Then we're walking through someone else's design. The team moved in, weapons raised, scanning every corner. Their boots pressed against the pristine flooring, each step absorbed by the eerie stillness. The air was dry, untouched by time or decay. Dax's voice crackled over comms. "Status?" Voss responded. "Intact. No bodies. No signs of a struggle." A pause. Then Dax's voice returned, quieter. "Then where did everyone go?" They pressed deeper into the station, winding through corridors that felt more like a mausoleum than a battlefield. Then they reached the central chamber. The doors slid open, revealing a massive circular war room, walls lined with dormant screens and consoles. The center held a single command dais, its surface blinking with faint blue data streams running in an unfamiliar rhythm. But it wasn't the technology that made Morn's breath hitch. It was the rows of empty armor, human armor, lined against the walls, perfectly arranged. Not discarded, not broken, waiting. Morn took a slow step forward. "This is wrong." Voss approached the command dais, his fingers hovering over the controls. The moment his hand brushed the surface, the station came to life. Lights flared in sequence, sweeping across the war room, screens illuminating with tactical data. And then, the voice returned. "Admiral Ryland Voss, you are late." The team froze. Morn's weapon snapped up, scanning for the source. "Where the hell is that coming from?" Hale's voice was barely above a whisper. "It's coming from the station itself." Voss didn't react. His eyes locked on the central display where an image began to form. A man's face. Human. Or something that had once been human. His features were sharp, eyes dark and unwavering, his expression calm. But there was something uncanny in his stillness, something too precise, too measured. "Identify yourself," Voss said. The figure on the screen inclined his head slightly. "I am Fleet Marshal Orrin Stikkes." A pause. "And I have been waiting for you." Dax's voice cut in over the comms. "That name's not possible. Stikkes died decades before Earth fell." Morn muttered under his breath. "Then why is he staring right at us?" The projection continued, unfazed. "This station was never abandoned. It was sealed, locked from the outside. Humanity did not leave it behind. We were buried here." The war room shuddered as systems reactivated deep within the station. Then came the final words. "And now that you have come, it is time to wake the fleet." The station trembled. Across the dead sector, dormant ships, hidden in the darkness, began to stir. Voss inhaled slowly. He had spent years turning ghosts into weapons. Now he had an entire fleet of them. The war room hummed with renewed power, the ancient displays flickering to life in synchronized pulses. Tactical maps unfolded across the air, displaying formations of dormant warships hidden in the debris field beyond the station. It was a fleet, one buried beneath history itself, waiting to be unleashed. Admiral Ryland Voss stood motionless at the center of it all, watching Orrin Stikkes' projected figure with a gaze sharpened by years of battle. The voice of a dead commander should not have been speaking, but here it was, speaking to him. Captain Eliar Morn's fingers flexed against his sidearm. "You said this station wasn't abandoned. Buried. Why?" Stikkes' projection remained eerily still before he answered. "Because the war we prepared for never came." His voice was steady, carrying the weight of something long planned but never executed. This fleet was built for a battle humanity was never allowed to fight. Commander Oren Dax let out a slow breath. Then why activate now? Why wake now, after 100 years? Stikkes' expression didn't change, but something in his voice shifted, deepening. Because, Admiral Voss, you brought the final war to us. Voss met the projection's gaze, his mind working like an engine on the verge of ignition. The Dominion had hunted them, caged them, believing the war was already over. And now, in their final hour, humanity wasn't just rising. They were about to teach the galaxy a lesson it would never forget. Voss inhaled slowly. How many ships? The display adjusted, revealing the sheer scale of the forgotten fleet. Hundreds of vessels, locked in a state of stasis. Not dead, not lost, just waiting. Morn let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. You cannot be serious. Dax took a slow step forward, eyes narrowing as realization dawned. They don't know. The Dominion doesn't know this exists. Voss nodded once, cold understanding settling in his chest. Then we make sure they learn. The Dominion had spent the last hours believing humanity was running. Now they would learn humanity had only been waiting. Voss turned to the war table, eyes scanning the ghost fleet, mind already mapping out the battle that hadn't happened a century ago, but would happen now. Here's what we do. His voice carried no hesitation, only finality. We let them believe we're still fractured, still desperate, Voss said, activating the battle map. We keep the damnation dark, just long enough for them to overextend. Dax nodded, already seeing the first play. They're expecting us to scatter and break, so we give them proof. False energy spikes, random distress calls, make them think we're leaking fuel, burning out reactors. Good, Voss affirmed. Force them to tighten their formation around our escape vector, make them commit. We don't fire first, Voss continued. Not yet. The moment they're fully invested in crushing what they think is our last stand, we trigger the fleet activation. Morn's eyes flicked toward the displays. That's hundreds of ships, Admiral, a century-old fleet. Do we even know if they can fight? Stikkes' projection finally moved, his head inclining slightly. They were designed to end wars before they began. They don't need to fire first. They just need to be seen. Morn let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. You're banking on fear. Voss's voice was quiet, but absolute. Number, I'm banking on certainty. Because that was the truth. The Dominion didn't fear humanity. They had already written them off. And when the impossible unfolded before their eyes, when a fleet thought erased lit up like a graveyard coming back to life, it wouldn't just be fear that shattered them. It would be the sudden, brutal realization that they had never truly won. On the Zivarian flagship, Lord High Regent Azrak Vel stood before the massive tactical displays, watching as human signals flickered erratically as if dying. His officers reported in hurried, clipped tones, reports of fractured human ships, failing systems, erratic movements. He should have been pleased, but something was wrong. His claws tapped against the console. Show me their flagship. A pause. Then, Sir, one of his officers said slowly, the damnation is gone. Azrak Vel's head snapped toward the display. Explain. The officer swallowed. There's no wreckage, no trace, it's just vanished. A cold weight settled in Azrak Vel's chest. The realization struck like a knife twisting between his ribs. We have not been hunting them. They have been leading us. Then a new reading exploded across the displays. Energy spikes. Massive ones. Azrak Vel's eyes widened as dozens, hundreds of warships appeared from the darkness. Ships that should not exist. Ships that had been waiting. His officers froze. Some stepped back from their stations, as if physically recoiling from the impossible. Azrak Vel's breath came slow, controlled, and yet the words escaped him before he could stop them. Impossible. Then, the first signal came through the fleet-wide comms, a voice, cold, familiar. Admiral Rylan Voss. "Regent," Voss said, his tone almost conversational, "you once told me this war was over." Azrak Vel couldn't speak. Voss's voice sharpened. "Then why are you about to lose?" And at that moment, the Ghost Fleet opened fire. The Dominion broke before the first battle even finished. The psychological weight of the revelation, of an entire human fleet rising from the dead, was more than their admirals could withstand. Some ships fled immediately, scattering into the void, unwilling to face something they had convinced themselves was impossible. Others hesitated, waiting for orders that never came. And at the center of it all, on his flagship, Lord High Regent Azrak Vel sat frozen. His empire had not fallen in fire. It had crumbled under the weight of a lie they had once believed to be true. And as the Dominion forces collapsed, as their fleet scattered like shattered glass across the darkness, Azrak Vel finally understood. This wasn't a victory. This was a lesson humanity had been waiting a century to teach. The Dominion fleet fractured, the once mighty war machine of the Zavarian Empire crumbling under the weight of fear and disbelief. Some commanders abandoned their posts, others issued desperate, contradictory orders, as if mere words could reverse the collapse unfolding before them. But it was too late. The moment the Ghost Fleet emerged from the dark, the war had been decided. On the bridge of the damnation, Admiral Rylan Voss watched the unraveling of an empire without expression. He stood tall, hands clasped behind his back, as if merely observing a shift in the tide, a natural inevitability rather than a victory. Commander Oren Dax exhaled slowly beside him, eyes locked on the tactical display. They're breaking apart. Some are trying to regroup at their fallback position, but he shook his head. It won't matter. Captain Eliar Morn let out a dry chuckle, arms folded as he leaned against the console. No, it won't. They're fighting something they don't understand. Voss tilted his head slightly. They aren't fighting at all. They're choosing how to surrender. The words landed like a hammer against stone. Morn's smirk faded, his gaze sharpening. He understood what Voss meant. This wasn't just a retreat. This was the slow, sinking realization of a species that had reached its limit. For centuries, the Dominion had ruled with absolute power, unquestioned, unchallenged. They had crushed planets, erased civilizations, and rewritten history to paint themselves as the architects of order. And yet, at the end of it all, they had been shattered, not by superior firepower, but by something far worse: the truth. "Sir," Lieutenant Varen Hale called from his station, his voice even, "we have an open channel from the Dominion flagship." Silence fell across the bridge. Morn exhaled, shaking his head. "So the good regent finally found his spine." Voss gave a slight nod. "Put him through." The heads-up display flickered to life, revealing Lord High Regent Azrak Vel. But he was not the same man they had spoken to before. The arrogance was gone. His once immaculate armor was loose on his frame, his eyes shadowed, his breathing shallow. He looked older, as if the weight of his empire's death had aged him in mere moments. "Admiral Voss," he said after a long pause, his voice lacking its usual authority. This should not be possible." Voss met his gaze, calm and unmoved. "And yet, here we are." Azrak Vel exhaled sharply, running a clawed hand over his face. "You have made your point. The Dominion will withdraw. You may keep your fleet, your broken world, whatever is left of your kind." Dax scoffed under his breath. "He still thinks he has a say in this." Voss didn't blink. "You misunderstand, Regent. We are not here to negotiate terms. We are here to end an era." Azrak Vel's nostrils flared. "You cannot expect us to simply—" I expect nothing, Voss cut in. That's the difference between us. You expect. You assume. You have spent centuries shaping the galaxy to your will, bending others to your rule. And in doing so, you convinced yourself that there were no threats left to face. The regent's lips pressed together, but he said nothing. Voss continued, his voice cold. You declared war on a species that you never understood. You mistook our silence for weakness, our losses for defeat, our absence for extinction. And now, you are learning the lesson that every empire learns too late. Azrak Vel swallowed. Which is... Voss leaned forward slightly. You never should have come for us. The regent's composure cracked. He bared his teeth, something between a snarl and a desperate attempt to salvage his pride. We could still fight. We could... Could you? Voss interrupted, tilting his head slightly. Look at your fleet, Regent. They are not fighting. They are waiting. Not for orders, not for reinforcements, but for permission to give up. Azrak Vel's claws twitched. He turned, glancing at his own displays, at the reports coming in from his shattered war machine. He knew it was true. Voss's voice softened, but the steel never left. Tell me, Regent, what do you think happens next? Azrak Vel's shoulders sagged. His eyes darted across the battle reports, searching for something, anything, but all he found was the confirmation of his own downfall. His breathing shallowed. The Dominion had fallen, and he had nothing left to say. Voss took a step back from the display. This is where we part ways, Regent. You will return to your world and inform your people that the war is over, not because you surrendered. He gestured to the battlefield where Dominion ships drifted aimlessly, but because your empire is already dead, and the galaxy has already moved on. Azrak Vel stared at him, speechless. Then the connection cut. For a long moment, the bridge was silent. Then Dax let out a slow breath, shaking his head. You just let them go? Voss didn't look away from the empty display where the regent's image had once been. They're already gone. Let them spend the rest of their days knowing they were never in control. Morn exhaled, arms still folded. And what about the rest of the galaxy? Voss finally turned, glancing out the viewing panels where the ghost fleet remained in formation, silent but present. A promise, a warning, an unspoken truth. We don't need to rule, he said simply. We don't need to conquer. We just need to be seen. Dax nodded, slowly understanding. Make them fear what they can't predict. Make them remember what they tried to erase, Morn added. Voss took one last look at the battle map, the shattered remains of the Dominion fleet retreating into the dark, defeated not by force but by the weight of their own ignorance. Then he turned away. Let's go home. And as the damnation led the last fleet of humanity away from the wreckage, the galaxy watched, forever changed. Because on that day, they learned the truth. Humanity was never truly defeated. They were only underestimated. And that had been the Dominion's final mistake.